I stood near the back of the venue, clutching the same envelope I had handed him 3 months ago, marked emergency only, filled with nearly everything I'd saved over 2 years. He said it was just a loan until his promotion came through. "You'll get it back before summer," he promised. But summer had come, and instead of returning the money, he spent it on champagne and fairy lights on a proposal I wasn't expecting, not because I didn't know he was going to ask someone to marry him, but because I thought that someone was me. I had helped him practice the speech, sat through nights he doubted himself, read through every draft of his vows like they were ours, and when the lights dimmed and the room quieted and he dropped to one knee in front of her, all I could do was hold my breath. The speech was almost identical, same phrases, same rhythm, except for one part, when he thanked everyone who believed in me, especially my best friend, and gestured vaguely toward the back. He didn't say my name, didn't even look, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I had imagined our entire relationship. The glances, the late-night confessions, the almosts, the way he used to call me home. Now I was just a friend, just a background character at the most important moment of his life, funded by me, erased by him. People clapped, she cried. I stood still, and in that frozen second watching them kiss under string lights, I helped him hang. I realized, you don't have to be broken up with to feel like you've been left. I didn't cry. Not then. There wasn't space for it. Not between the cheers and the camera flashes. I just smiled politely when someone brushed past and said, "Aren't you his friend? You must be so proud." Proud, that word stung more than the silence. Because pride was something you felt for someone who'd earned it, and he hadn't. He'd rehearsed love in front of me, borrowed money with promises he never intended to keep, then stood in front of a crowd and thanked the world like he'd built this moment from scratch. But I knew the cost. I'd seen his bank account. I'd offered rides when his car broke down. I'd skipped dinners to cover his electric bill. I was the safety net, the invisible scaffold holding up his spotlight, and no one in that room knew. Not her, not their parents, not the bridesmaids who clapped like they'd watched a fairy tale unfold. They didn't know he'd once sat on my floor shaking, saying he didn't think anyone would ever want him, or that I stayed up all night helping him design the ring. He was testing the waters, thinking maybe I was the one. But in the end, I wasn't the chapter. I was the margin note. Helpful, quiet, erased. So I stood, clapped once, and walked toward the exit before the music swelled again. Outside, the night was warm, but my skin felt cold. Not from heartbreak, from humiliation, from realizing I hadn't been overlooked. I'd been used strategically, gently, like the way you lean on someone until you've found something sturdier, and once you do, you forget who kept you standing, and pretend you never needed help at all. I sat in my car for almost an hour. The reception music floated faintly through the trees, soft and distant, like a party I was never really invited to. I kept replaying his speech in my mind, how he said just a friend with a smile, how her eyes lit up like the world had finally seen him, and maybe it had, but the version of him they saw was built on pieces of me. Pieces I gave freely, believing they were laying the foundation of something honest. Instead, they were the scaffolding he stepped off of, right into her arms. The worst part wasn't that he didn't love me, it was that he did just enough. To borrow just enough to lean on, but never enough to choose. And somehow that kind of love hurts more than rejection, because it tricks you into believing you were essential, when really you were convenient. I looked at my phone. No, missed calls, no texts. I imagined he thought I'd understand, that I'd sit in the audience, smile for the pictures, swallow the ache, like I always had, but I didn't. Not this time. I turned the engine on, but didn't drive. I just sat there, hands on the wheel, and let the truth settle. He had taken the best of me and handed it to someone else with a bow. And the version of me who stayed through every failure, who fronted the bill when no one else showed up, she wasn't even worth naming. He didn't break my heart. He edited me out. And somehow that silence felt louder than any goodbye I'd ever heard. The next morning, I told myself it didn't mean anything, that maybe just a friend was his way of protecting our bond. That saying my name might have made things awkward, complicated. Maybe he was trying to keep the peace. I tried to believe. That I told myself the speech was rushed, improvised, that he meant to say more. I even convinced myself that the envelope with my savings was still somewhere in his drawer, labeled untouched. But when I opened social media, the first post that popped up was theirs. A photo of them kissing under the string lights I had helped him install, captioned, "Nothing was possible without you, my love." And she had replied, "You did it all on your own." My stomach dropped. It wasn't just that I hadn't been thanked. It was that my absence had been rewritten as part of the narrative. He hadn't forgotten me. He had erased me on purpose. Didn't include the girl who once paid his phone bill, who drove him across the state for interviews, who stayed up proofreading his applications while eating canned soup. I was the dust he swept under the rug before guests arrived. And I wasn't mad yet. I was stunned. Like waking up and realizing the fire you smelled all night wasn't a dream. It was real. Hundreds of likes. Comments from people saying he was a man who built everything from nothing, and the girl who held the bricks, one by one, she didn't even get a shadow in the frame. I started tracing the timeline backward not out of obsession, but because something inside me needed proof that I hadn't imagined everything, that I wasn't crazy for thinking we were more than just friends. I remember the night his car broke down, and I picked him up in the rain, against the window, and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." The way he looked at me when he said it, tired but soft, like I was home. He used to call every night, used to ask me what I ate, used to say things like, "When it's our time," and I had filled in the rest. Our time to move in. Our time to build something real. Our time to stop pretending we were just convenient. But now I wondered if those words were just placeholders, things you say when you need someone, not when you love them. I remembered him asking if I could cover his deposit just for now, how he had said, "You're the only person I trust," how I had smiled like that was intimacy. But now it tasted like strategy, like I had been managed, kept close enough to feel special, but far enough to never be a threat. He built a ladder with my loyalty, and once he reached her, he pulled it up. No warning, no thank you. Just a speech that rewrote history. And the worst part? He probably slept fine that night. Probably thought I'd get over it. Because women, like me, always do, we stitch up our own wounds and then apologize for bleeding where no one can see. That night, I couldn't sleep, questioned. The nights he vented, and I listened. The projects he dropped on me last minute, and I completed without complaint. The times he introduced me to others as his rock, but never as someone to look at twice. I used to wear that title like it meant something, but rocks don't get invited to the ceremony. They just sit underneath it, invisible, holding up the weight of the celebration. And I had done that willingly. I realized I had built a life around his potential, and in doing so, I paused my own every sure. I can help, every it's fine, I'll wait. Every time I chose his needs over mine, I had been saying yes to being invisible. Not because I didn't want to be seen, but because I hoped he'd eventually turn around and notice. But he never did. And maybe that's what broke me more than the speech. But that I handed him everything, time, energy, belief, and he never once thought I deserved a name in the story. I thought love was built through patience, through sacrifice. But love without reciprocity isn't love. It's loyalty to a version of someone that only exists in your imagination, and I was done imagining, done hoping, done clapping from the shadows. He may have walked into his future without me, but I finally stepped out of the waiting room. And that's where healing starts. Not with answers, but with no longer needing the ones who never asked how you got home. I didn't block him. I didn't unfollow her. I didn't write a dramatic post or send a long message demanding closure. And I was done giving them center stage in a story that had already cost me too much. Instead, I went quiet. Unfollowed the engagement, hashtags. Moved the box with the receipts and ring mock-ups to the back of my closet. A future that didn't orbit his decisions. The silence felt strange at first, like a room you keep tiptoeing in, afraid to disturb something. But after a few days, it started to feel like breathing again. Like choosing peace over replaying a scene that never changed. I took myself out. For coffee, brought a book I hadn't touched in months. I wasn't trying to distract myself. And in that quiet, small morning moment, one table, one cup, one pud, felt something loosen in my chest. Not joy, not forgiveness, just the absence of need. I didn't need his recognition to validate what I gave, and I didn't envy them. I just hoped she never had to find herself staring at an engagement she paid for from the outside. Finally knew her value wasn't up for auction anymore. I started setting new rules, nothing dramatic. Just boundaries I never thought I was allowed to have. I stopped picking up calls after 9 p.m., stopped answering messages that only came when someone needed something. I stopped saying it's okay when it wasn't, and started saying I need a moment when I did. At first it felt unnatural, like wearing someone else's coats, lightly stiff, slightly unfamiliar. But each time I honored a need, instead of burying it, I felt something inside me stand a little taller. I began sorting through my finances too, not just because I needed to recover, but because it was time I stopped treating survival as generosity. I canceled a few automatic payments I'd forgotten I was covering for people who hadn't thanked me in months. I made a list of things I wanted to do just for myself. Visit the coast, take a pottery class, get a better mattress. I wanted to carry it myself, not because I had to, but because I finally believed I was worth the effort. There was no revenge plan, no late-night monologue, just quiet movement forward. And it was in that quiet that I realized the true damage wasn't what he took from me. It was how long I believed I had to keep giving just to stay close to something that never intended to hold me. So now, I hold myself. Not tightly, just gently enough to never hand myself away again to someone. Just a simple, hope you're okay, let's catch up soon. As if nothing had happened, I stared at the message for a while. It didn't make me angry, it made me tired. Tired of how easy it was for him to return. Not to take responsibility, but to keep the peace. Because people like him don't fear being forgotten, they fear losing access. And I had always been accessible, quick to reply, willing to fold my feelings into something more convenient for him to carry, but not this time. I didn't block him. I didn't send a long reply. I simply wrote, I think we both know there's nothing to catch up on. No moral high ground. Just a closed door that didn't slam it. Clicked quietly. And in that moment, I felt something real. Not satisfaction. Not victory, but clarity. I wasn't the girl hoping to be seen anymore. I was the woman who had seen enough. He could keep his new chapter. He could pretend it had always been her. But I would never again pretend I hadn't held up the pages before she arrived. And if that meant fewer people in my life, so be it. Because silence doesn't scare me anymore. A month passed. I didn't realize how much had changed until I really laughed at a cafe with someone I barely knew. A coworker. Nothing romantic. Just someone who asked how my week was and waited for the answer. No glances at his phone. No subtle pivots to his own stress. Just presence. And it startled me, that feeling of being regarded without being needed. I hadn't realized how much I'd taught myself to equate attention with obligation. I used to think intimacy meant being someone's emergency contact. Now, I was learning that sometimes love looks like someone remembering how you take your coffee. It was a quiet kind of healing. No dramatic comebacks or triumphant returns. Just still mornings where I didn't check his page. Just grocery runs where I didn't think about what he'd want. Just space. And in that space, I started making new associations. I drove past the restaurant where we used to plan his proposals. And didn't flinch. I heard his favorite song at the pharmacy and didn't pause. I wore the dress I bought for his dinner speech to a friend's birthday instead and felt stunning. Not because anyone noticed, but because I didn't need them to. My life wasn't waiting anymore. It was unfolding. Looked like the life I thought I'd be sharing with him. It looked more like me than anything I had worn in years. I wasn't over the betrayal, but I wasn't under it anymore either. It no longer pressed against my ribs when I breathed. Finally made room. Not for him, but for a version of myself who never needed to beg to be part of the story. I started spending more time alone, not out of isolation, but because solitude finally felt safe. The same bench every Sunday, and just exist. No one asking for favors, no one leaning on me mid-crisis, no one measuring my value by how much I could hold for them. For the first time, I wasn't preparing for someone else's needs. I was listening to my own. I used to fill every silence with service. Now I filled it with breath, with books, with long baths and music. I didn't have to justify, and an even greater one in realizing I had confused dependence with closeness. He didn't love me. He relied on me. And when he no longer needed the support, he replaced it with someone easier to show off. But I wasn't a placeholder. The friend who would wait forever in the wings, applauding from behind the curtain. I was the one who carried his script when he had forgotten his lines. And now, I was writing my own, quietly, without hashtags, without needing to be the reason someone else stood taller. I wasn't building shrines out of temporary attention anymore. I was learning how to hold myself upright even when no one clapped, especially then, because love without reciprocity is a slow unraveling, and I had finally found the thread again. It wasn't tied to anyone, just to me, steady, whole, and stronger than I'd ever realized when I was too busy handing it away. I found the envelope a few weeks later, tucked behind some books on my shelf. It was the same one I had labeled emergency only. Now empty, crinkled at the corners, a silent relic of everything I gave, without question. I held it in my hands, not with anger, but with something quieter, just money. It was belief in him. In the story I thought we were building, in the idea that love would always recognize its source, but it hadn't. And still here I was not broken, just done. I didn't rip the envelope, didn't burn it. I placed it gently in the trash because it didn't deserve ceremony. It had already taken enough of me. That moment felt final. Not in a loud cinematic way, you knowing you'll never look back, and I didn't. Not even when his name came up in conversation. Not when mutual friends posted anniversary photos or tagged him in group dinners. And sometimes, that's the greater distance. Because now, when I think of him, I don't feel the ache of what I lost. I feel the strength of what I refused to keep losing myself. And in that, there's something sacred. Not all victories are loud. Some come in the form of not replying, of sleeping through the night, of buying yourself flowers and not needing a reason. He may have proposed with my savings, but I invested in something deeper. The version of me who finally knew that love given freely doesn't mean love owed, and that not being named in his speech doesn't mean I was never worth remembering. Last week, someone at work asked me to speak on a panel. "You always hold the room together," she said. "We need that kind of steadiness up front." I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because I had spent so long being invisible that I forgot what it felt like to be seen for something other than how much I could absorb. I said yes not out of pride, but because I finally believed I had something to say, something that didn't need to be borrowed. The night of the event, I stood behind the podium and looked out at the room. No one in the audience knew what I'd been through. They hadn't seen the night I left the wedding alone. They didn't know about the envelope or the silence that followed, but I did, and it made the moment mine. When I finished speaking, there wasn't thunderous applause, just genuine nods, soft smiles, people who leaned in instead of looking away. And for once, I didn't walk off stage wondering if I had done enough. I just walked, steady, present, enough. Later that night, I took a photo in the mirror, nothing filtered, no caption. Just me in the same blazer I once wore to his engagement dinner, now repurposed, reclaimed, because I wasn't hiding anymore. Not from the memory, not from the absence, and certainly not from myself. He may have given a speech, but I had found my voice, and I no longer needed to be the reason someone else rose. I was rising on my own now, not in a spotlight, but in something far more lasting, the quiet certainty that I'll never again fund a dream I'm not invited to live in. I walked home that night without headphones, letting the city hum around me. It was strange how alive everything felt. The air, the traffic, the rhythm of footsteps that weren't rushing anywhere. I used to walk with my head down, rehearsing conversations that would never happen, rewriting endings that never came. But not anymore. That night, I looked up. I passed by couples, friends laughing, even a man proposing beneath a string of fairy lights, and I didn't freeze. I didn't flinch. I just kept walking, because I knew now not all stories are meant to end with applause. Some end with understanding. And mine had. He would always remember that night as his beginning, but I would remember it as my release. He called me just a friend to keep the narrative clean, but I was the one who gave him the tools to tell the story at all. And maybe he'll never say it. Maybe he'll never look back, but I don't need him to, because I did. I looked back long enough to learn to see the patterns, to forgive the version of me that stayed too long, gave too much, and asked for too little. And now I'm looking forward, not with bitterness, but with boundaries, not with revenge, but with respect. For myself, I used to think love was about being chosen. Now I know it's about choosing myself even when no one else does, especially then, because it's not the speech that defines the love, it's who was still standing after the lights dimmed. And I was there, not in his memory but in mine, and this time, that's the only one that matters. This morning, I made coffee in the mug he once said didn't match his aesthetic. I used to hide it when he came over, as if his preferences outranked my comfort, but today, I held it with both hands. The handle slightly cracked, the words faded, kindness is strength. I smiled at the irony, because that's what they never tell you about people who give too much. We're not weak, we're just hoping someone will give back. And when they don't, we learn how to give differently, with boundaries, with discernment, with love that includes ourselves. I sat by the window and watched the light crawl across my living room floor. No noise, no apologies, just space. I had spent years filling silence with service, mistaking exhaustion for connection. But now I knew better. The quiet didn't mean I was unloved. It meant I was finally listening to the part of me that whispered, "You don't have to earn your place." He may have forgotten to say my name in his speech, but I will never forget mine again. And one day when someone asks how I survived being rewritten, I'll say this: I stopped begging to be part of someone else's moment, and built a life I never had to shrink inside. And you? Have you ever watched someone use your love to build a future that didn't include you? If this story found something quiet in you, comment. I remember who I am.